Chapter 4. Shifting Foundations. The dungeon classroom was a study in contrasts. Its cold, damp air was pierced by the warm, flickering light of cauldron fires. It had been a few days since Seamus's potion exploded, and she was healing nicely. The hum of low conversation and the rhythmic chopping of ingredients filled the room, yet Draco and Hermione's workstation felt like an island unto itself, wrapped in an unspoken tension. Hermione sat stiffly, her quill scratching quick notes onto a roll of parchment. Her movements were sharp and deliberate, her back ramrod straight. Across from her, Draco leaned back in his chair, one hand tapping out an idle rhythm on the wooden table as he scanned the instructions. She had resolved to be professional. After all, it wasn't her choice to be partnered with Draco Malfoy, and it certainly wasn't her preference. Professor Snape, in his infinite wisdom or cruelty, had thought it amusing to pair her with someone she barely trusted to handle ingredients, much less her time and patience. Yet here they were, stuck together on a term-long project. Draco shifted in his chair, breaking the silence. "Relax, Granger. You're going to burn a hole in that parchment if you keep scowling at it." "I'm not scowling," Hermione shot back, not looking up. "And maybe I'd relax if my partner didn't spend so much time twiddling his thumbs." Draco smirked faintly, though the edge of his usual sneer was absent. "You're wound tighter than a hippogriff's tether," he said, standing to fetch their shared supply of powdered dragonclaw. "This isn't your first potions project. Surely you can trust me not to explode the cauldron." "Trust you?" Hermione finally lifted her gaze, eyes narrowed. "Forgive me if I'm less than confident given your track record." The weight of her words settled over them, and for a fleeting moment Draco's mask slipped. His usual confidence wavered, replaced by something raw and fleeting, shame perhaps, or regret. He looked down, his fingers tightening briefly on the vial in his hand before he set it on the table with a deliberate gentleness. "Fair enough," he said quietly, the smirk completely gone now. "But I don't intend to mess this up, Granger. Not this time." Hermione blinked, momentarily startled by the sincerity in his tone. Before she could respond, Draco leaned forward, picking up the instructions and scanning them with renewed focus. "Step 3, he said briskly. "Simmer the base until it turns gold. Your turn to stir." She hesitated, still thrown by the shift in his demeanour. But, with a small nod, she picked up the long silver stirrer and moved to the cauldron, her movements precise. The potion swirled and shimmered under her hand, the faint aroma of mint and something metallic wafting into the air. As they worked, the initial tension between them began to fray, replaced by a tenuous truce. Draco, to Hermione's surprise, followed her lead without protest, his usual snide remarks conspicuously absent, and though she'd never admit it, he was competent, more so than she had expected. The sound of glass clinking against wood drew her attention back to him. Draco was carefully measuring out a viscous, deep purple liquid into a beaker, his brow furrowed in concentration. For a moment she allowed herself to observe him without the usual filter of skepticism. He looked different, not in appearance but in presence. The arrogance that usually clung to him like a second skin was muted, replaced by something quieter, more restrained. "You're staring," he said without looking up, his tone oddly neutral. Hermione flushed and quickly turned back to her notes. "I wasn't staring," she muttered, dipping her quill into ink. Draco set the beaker down with a soft clink and tilted his head slightly, his grey eyes catching hers. "It's okay if you were," he said, a small, almost self-deprecating smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I know I'm not who you want to be partnered with." Hermione's quill paused mid-stroke, and for a moment she couldn't think of a response. His words weren't defensive or accusatory. They were matter-of-fact, almost resigned. "You're right," she said finally, her voice softer than she intended. "You're not." Draco nodded, as if he had expected no less. "But," she continued, surprising even herself, "you've been different these past few days." He raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "I don't know why," she admitted, glancing down at her parchment, "and I don't know if I can trust it. But you have been different." A silence stretched between them, filled only by the bubbling of their potion. Draco leaned back slightly, studying her with an unreadable expression. "I suppose," he said finally, his voice low, "time will tell if you can." Before Hermione could respond, Professor Snape's sharp voice cut through the air, startling them both. "Granger, Malfoy, your potion appears adequate for now. Do try not to ruin it in the final stages." The moment was broken, and Hermione turned back to her notes. Her cheeks flushed. Draco, for his part, resumed his work, though the faintest hint of a smile lingered on his lips. As they cleaned up their station at the end of class, Hermione found herself glancing at Draco once more. His steps were purposeful, but unhurried as he carried the empty cauldron to the sink. And though she still didn't fully trust him, she couldn't deny that something between them had shifted, ever so slightly. Perhaps, she thought as she packed her bag, trust wasn't something that could be forced. Perhaps it had to be earned, one fragile step at a time. The Gryffindor common room was unusually subdued, the golden glow of the fireplace painting warm hues on the worn stone walls. Hermione sat nestled in her favourite armchair, her fortress of books and parchment forming a protective barrier around her. She tried to focus on the essay in front of her, but her thoughts wandered, slipping back to Draco Malfoy. Why did he have to be so complicated? She pressed her quill harder into the parchment than necessary, the scratch of ink the only sound in the quiet corner. His words from earlier lingered in her mind. "I'm not that person anymore." There had been something in his tone, earnest, almost raw, that didn't sit neatly into her expectations of him. It unsettled her, and she hated that it unsettled her. The sudden clearing of a throat made Hermione jump. She looked up to see the fat lady in her portrait frame, her cheeks rosy, and her expression faintly amused. "Miss Granger," the fat lady began, tilting her head, "there's someone outside who insists on speaking with you. Shall I shoo him away?" Hermione frowned. "Who is it?" The fat lady leaned closer, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "That blonde boy who struts about like a peacock. Malfoy, I believe, though he's not strutting now, more like pacing." Hermione's frown deepened, but she couldn't help but let out a snort. "Malfoy, here." The fat lady nodded, her tone bemused. "Yes, here. Says it's about your potions project. Shall I tell him you're unavailable?" Hermione hesitated. As much as she wanted to send him away, she couldn't risk delays in their project. With a resigned sigh, she shook her head. "Let him in." The portrait swung open, revealing Draco Malfoy on the threshold. He stepped inside with an air of restrained discomfort, his usual arrogance replaced with something quieter. His gaze flicked around the common room before settling on Hermione. "Granger," he said, his voice low. "Malfoy," she replied warily. "What are you doing here?" Draco held up a folded piece of parchment. "McGonagall sent me," he said simply. "Something about updates to the project." Hermione took the parchment, her eyes scanning the instructions. They appeared legitimate, but she couldn't shake her suspicion. She set the parchment on the table and looked back at him. "Thank you," she said curtly. "Is that all?" Draco didn't answer immediately. Instead, he shifted his weight, glancing toward the floor. "No," he said finally, his tone softer. "There's something else." Hermione folded her arms, watching him closely. "Go on." Draco hesitated, as though weighing his words carefully. "I know things are complicated between us," he began, his voice low and steady, "but I'd like to think they don't have to stay that way." Hermione raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "I'm not asking for anything now," he said quickly, as though anticipating her objection. "But someday, maybe, when all this is behind us, I hope we can be friends." Hermione blinked, caught completely off guard. Of all the things she had expected him to say, that wasn't one of them. She studied his face, searching for any sign of mockery or ulterior motive, but found none. His expression was open, almost hesitant. "Friends?" she repeated, as though testing the word. Draco gave a small shrug. "Stranger things have happened, haven't they?" A flicker of something, amusement maybe, passed through her eyes, though her tone remained cautious. "I suppose they have." As Draco turned and walked back toward the portrait hole, Hermione sank back into her chair, her thoughts churning like the stormy clouds of a brewing potion. The idea of becoming friends with Draco Malfoy felt like venturing into forbidden territory. Trust wasn't something she handed out lightly, and Draco's history loomed large in her mind. What would her friends think? Ron would explode at the very idea, and Harry. Well, Harry had a knack for forgiveness, but even he might struggle with this. And then there were the risks. Draco's transformation, if it was genuine, was still new and fragile. What if he reverted to the person he had been? What if this was all some elaborate ploy? Hermione sighed, her fingers toying with the edge of the parchment Draco had delivered. There was too much history between them, too much bad blood. And yet, a tiny voice in the back of her mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, people could change. Maybe she could afford to believe in that, if only a little. Shaking her head, she pushed the thought aside. It wouldn't do to get caught up in hypotheticals. She had more immediate concerns, like finishing her essay. Picking up her quill, she forced herself to focus, though Draco's words lingered, threading through her thoughts like fine strands of spider silk.